Hello there, dear viewers, how in oblivion are you? Hey, look at the disgustingly overpowered Skyrim build I made. This guy has it all. He has auto-cast spells enhancing power attacks, he has extended slow time, he calls lightning storms almost at will, his sword brings down lightning on hit and a lightning explosion, which are not the same thing. He has freaking shieldless shield charge for crowd control, he can refresh shout cooldown almost at will, thus chaining some of the most OP shouts Skyrim modding community has ever created. He freaking enhances himself with Dragon Souls via Dragon Soul Reliquinshment, I cannot speak mod, which is horribly convenient because he also gets a free surprise birthday Dragon Soul from Kain every once in a while. He lives with the Greybeards at the top of the world and cares nothing for earthly goods, as his voice is the only tool he needs to absolutely obliterate his foes. Well, that and the Dragonbane, not even because it's particularly powerful, but because he believes that the sword was given to him by destiny. His adventures will most likely revolve around the main quest and some dragon slaying, although some downguard shouts will be incredibly useful to him as well. Generally, the vibe roleplay is a monk swordmaster, allowing us to use some of the most perfectly balanced perks and combine them with superb Thunderchild shouts, and he is the perfect dragon slayer as he is the devotee of Akatosh. Yes, he is my first divine build in a 9-episode series I'm just starting now, and he is the perfect Dragonslayer as a devotee of Akatosh. He gets a lot of buffs, well, one buff to everything against dragons. Can you tell I like the build already? Am I positive and enthusiastic enough to convince you not to click away to your favorite freaking Ryan George video? Anywho, not to completely over-advertise, with the rule of never wearing expensive enchanted items and without armor skills, the early game may be very challenging. I tried to meet the challenge by using some very cheap illusion and alteration debuff spells from all the spell mods, and by getting the unyielding storm Thunderchild power as early as I could. That power removes shout cooldown once per day. Then, as a devotee of Akatosh, you can regain the use of that power, basically granting you an option to remove the cooldown for each fight without waiting 24 in-game hours and long time before some powerful shout perks from Vokrii could be unlocked. There is a rather long list of mods you need to use if you want the build to work as presented. You need Vokrii perks, especially for the shouting perks, Wintersun obviously, as this is the Wintersun-centered series of builds. The refreshing of daily power with each prayer does wonders for the build, and you should strive to increase your favor with Akatosh as fast as possible. It's actually quite easy because Akatosh actually likes you gaining levels, and you can start worshipping Akatosh at the start of the game, so the first 10 to 20 levels are rather fast to come by, and then the favor of Akatosh rises. As soon as you can use the Breton spell absorbing daily power at will, your dragon fights will get much easier, as you will just absorb all the breath attacks. Reliquary of Myth changes the Dragonbane into a somewhat useful weapon that can deal decent shock damage, potentially preventing spellcasting and shouting, and most importantly having a little chance to channel a lightning strike down on your foes. That's on the top of the lightning strike granted by the Storm Blast shout from Thunderchild, which not only provides cool shouts like that, but also abilities we are going to abuse mercilessly. Especially the Storm Crown ability, which resets the shout cooldown every time we enter or leave combat. Of course, if you are a regular on the channel, you know what we do when something insanely overpowered triggers upon entering combat. We use the Escape Artist Vokrii sneak perk to basically leave and re-enter combat by crouching, pretty much at will. This means near infinite shouting without rest looping the blessing or the Amulet of Talos, which is neat because we want to only pray to Akatosh. Then we have the Dragon Souls Relinquishment, which makes the excess Dragon Souls useful. You can increase your attributes and decrease shout cooldown, and even get some extra perk points by sacrificing Dragon Souls. I used it mainly to increase attributes, particularly health, as for the major part of the playthrough I suffered from low armor rating, and also because this is a hybrid build which requires an even spread of attributes, meaning you may be running out of magicka or stamina a bit too often. Later in the game, some souls were used to reduce shout cooldown timer too. And finally, we have all the cool spell mods: Apocalypse for Akatosh Recital, Odin for shocking strikes enhancing power attacks with shock damage, and some debuff spells for the early game. Triumvirate for another enhancement to power attacks, this time armor reducing Stave of Ferocity. And we have advanced Alteration for the beautiful spell of Augmented Parry, which enhances block bashing with a staggering force wave. Just the duelist side of the build is already filled with explosions and OPness. Let's not stop there though. The race is a Breton, and we want the vanilla Breton because with the Atronax Stone and the Prayer of Akatosh from Wintersun we can refresh the Dragonskin Breton power between fights, which with the Atronax Standing Stone means full spell absorption and will. The attribute spread is 1 magicka per 1 health per 1 stamina. In a longer playthrough you will also use Dragon Souls for the attributes, and as I said, I would recommend dropping most of that into health with maybe an occasional increase of stamina as well. The video will resume right after this message. In the modern society, we all consume content every day, but do you know where all the content comes from? It takes a lot of time and effort to create content. Content creators work tirelessly every day to make sure you get your fix of weird eating sounds and video games memes.
This drug, this narcotic, this magnificent spoon is now mine.
They sweat and toil in the never-ending mission to become more relatable.
I've once touched my genitals.
To stay on top of the latest trends, to save Canada from itself.
Look the fuck out.
To keep you informed on vital current issues. But most importantly, to make your day approximately 0.5% less miserable. But the life of a content creator is an uphill battle. It requires discipline and determination and technical skills. All that and most content creators are still underpaid and undiscovered. You may not realize that you know one. Content creators can work at your office, they can be shopkeepers and fitness trainers, they may live in your neighborhood, they can be in your room right now, like one can be under your bed at this very moment. This is why we need to take good care of our content creators. We need to affirm and appreciate them. We all need to be patrons. Support your content creators. Be a patron. Come on, it's the current year, give me your goddamn money. The main skills are one-handed block, alteration, speech and sneak. Very few perk points were also put in destruction, smithing and illusion. Smithing is only here for us to be able to improve the Dragon Bane, which is going to matter the most on legendary difficulty. Good news is we have enough armor rating effects and a few sources of extra damage on power attacks, which means we don't need to collect all the fortified smithing items in the world. Just the blacksmith's elixir should be approximately enough. The grind of this build is not in crafting, it's in collecting all the words of power, and the powers enhancing the shouts. Power. Power. In one-handed we need the power attack perks on the right-hand side, all of them and fast. The sword branch has the very attractive perk of Victory Rush at the top, which is a godsend for this build as well, because it restores stamina on kills and we will struggle with stamina as we have no items or any other effects increasing it or its regeneration. This is fine though. There is a spell in Odin exactly for this kind of trouble called Shield of Daybreak, which is rather cheap to cast and can be automated with Akatosh Recital of course, and it restores a bit of your stamina each time you block a hit. So use that until you have the Victory Rush. After you unlock it, use the Shield of Sanctuary instead, which restores magicka when you block a hit. In block, go for the weapon block and quick reflexes ASAP. They will both increase your ability to survive harder fights by quite a lot, especially if you add the augmented parry and Shield of Daybreak spells, which should grant you an extra 60% blocking efficiency altogether. The bashing perks can be treated with lower priority, although it may be useful at times to deliver the effects of shocking strikes and stave of ferocity spells with a power bash instead of a power attack. In the middle, we go for the wonderful shield charge, because charging with a shield but without a shield is totally a thing in Skyrim. You need to practice it a bit to be able to pull it off. Basically, you sprint towards your enemies and raise your block exactly as you run into their hitbox. It is not fully reliable and seems like a pain in the arse for a character who can use unrelenting force nearly at will, but the problem is, shieldless shield charge is super cool. Hey, I marked it optional, right? There is the word optional in the brackets, just stop whining, you don't have to take it. Next up we have the glorious, glamorous and gorgeous Vokrii Alteration. And this time we don't even need that many perks in it to squeeze value out of it. We only need Mastery, all the ranks of Mage, Armor, Akatosh Preparation, Stability and Sorcerer's Robes. Akatosh Preparation is rather crucial, it casts your best armor spell at the start of each fight, and you need it both because of relatively low magic and simply for survival. Usually I don't care too much about automating the master level Dragonhide spell with this perk, or any other means, because it doesn't last long enough for me to avoid some pretty embarrassing defeats. However, this time around we not only have the stability perk extending its duration and coincidentally also the duration of slow time shout, but we also have the ability to refresh all our autocast spells basically at a whim. So yeah, Dragonhide will have all the benefits and none of the drawbacks. Sorcerer's Robes will improve all your spells by 25%, which is very welcome since you don't craft any OP potions or items. So this perk combined with Hethot's Disjunction in Destruction and the augmented shock from that tree are our only ways of improving magical damage output. Stability, Sorcerer's Robes and Akatosh Recital are all available rather early in the game at skill level 40, and all bring a noticeable improvement, so take them sooner rather than later. Meanwhile, in speech we take all the shouting perks, of course. Tonal Harmony was taken at level 2 or 3, if I remember correctly, as it only requires skill level of 20 and matters the most in the early game. It heals all your attributes each time you shout by the amount equal to the shout's cooldown in seconds. It makes little difference in the late game when you take more damage and have the cooldowns decreased, but then in the late game you shout almost all the time. This little early game perk can offset your problems with magic and stamina quite neatly. Of course, we also want a 1 in 4 chance of completely removing the current cooldown of the Dovazulan perk. With the Storm Crown ability you will have cooldown removed each time you enter combat, and with Thundering Echoes ability the first shout you use in that combat will also have no cooldown, and each consecutive shout in that fight will have a 25% chance of having no cooldown, and when it has any, you can grind it down with the Scald perk by power attacking a lot with your super enhanced explosive lightning invoking power attacks, or with some sneak perks you can simply remove the cooldown by crouching a little bit. If you can't leave the combat by the amazing magic of teabagging, you can use the daily power of Unyielding Storm to completely remove that pesky cooldown. Speaking of teabagging, here is the list of sneak perks. We want the glorious dodge perks, with the dodge roll granting us a brief invulnerability to all attacks, but also because it makes the shieldless shield charge a tad easier to pull off and more amusing to look at. But first and foremost, we desire unlimited... No, we need the Escape Artist perk, which is pretty much the same for the reasons I already mentioned more than once, because it's so very cool and I have a brain of an 8-year-old. Well, don't be mean, okay? It's my identity. To make that spell and cooldown refreshing trick even smoother, we also need quiet casting in Illusion. Early on, sneak will be rather vital for your survival. You should aim for some sneak kills to train sneak and avoid embarrassing defeats, so you can train Illusion by casting Muffle while you are at it, but also, as mentioned, by casting debuff spells such as Weakness or Frailty at your enemies when open fight becomes inevitable. Meanwhile, in Destruction we mainly go for the Augmented Shock, as it is the best element against magical enemies, including dragons, and being a super agile Dragonslayer is our main thing. We also go up the right hand branch until we get the Head Hostage Junction, which makes our Cloak spells apply weakness to their element, making our Shocking Strikes and our Dragonbane sword all the more useful. Needless to say, Lightning Cloak is cast for free via Akatosh Recital. Very late in the game, once your combat skills are nearly wrapped up, you may also consider Deafening Shock, as it can silence enemies affected by shock, preventing both spellcasting and shouting for 2 seconds. Dragonbane effect, your Cloak, your Storm Blast Shout and Shocking Strike spell all can trigger this effect, so you get a very decent chance of making magical enemies useless this way. For the Master and Legendary difficulties, you also need Steel, Smithing and Arcane Blacksmith in the Smithing tree. Most of the main spells have been mentioned, but here's the list anyway. Lightning, Cloak, Stave of Ferocity and Holy Shock are cast through Akatosh Recital. Holy Shock deals extra shock and sand damage on power attacks, and Stave of Ferocity reduces both armor and magic resistance on power attack targets, which combines very nicely with the 25% weakness to shock applied by your Cloak spells. Shield of Sanctuary was cast via the rather expensive Akatosh spell trigger, so that's 4 automated spells, and it combines remarkably with the augmented parry, as both spells make your block negate more damage, and while parry drains your magicka each time you bash to create a force wave, Shield of Sanctuary restores your magicka each time you block a hit. Early in the game, debuff spells such as Weakness, as mentioned, Undermine or Wither were used to slow down, reduce armor and even prevent power attacks. Now shouts, and they are completely perfectly balanced, exactly as Todd envisioned. With Thunderchild you can go completely berserk with them, pretty much unleashing hell and apocalypse on your foes. So with all the cooldown reduction, stacking marks for death with Drain Vitality was a frequent gimmick, and with the Thundering Echoes ability you can open each fight with slow time if you wish, and then proceed to shout whatever else you feel like shouting, because the cooldown timer is reset immediately, of course. Obviously, when outdoors we open with Storm Call, and when the cooldown is reset, then we go for, say, Dragon Rant when fighting dragons, or maybe Cyclone or Fusroda if there is a ledge to hurl our enemies from, or just for the Storm Blast. Yes, and the perfectly balanced Thunderchild shouts like Wanderlust. Yeah, this one is perhaps the most fair and balanced. 3 words of it add 1 word of a random shout to your other shouts you use for the duration of Wanderlust. It is superbly chaotic and can use shouts you haven't even learned yet. For example, Marked for Death summoned a Champion of the Dragon War for me on the top of the normal Marked for Death effects. 1 word of Ice Form triggered quite frequently too, and I have no idea if there are some limitations or pre-selection of the shouts that can be triggered on top of your shouts with Wanderlust, but it is definitely fun. Also, Lightning Shield is a very good one. It can punish enemies hitting you in melee with some shock damage, and that stacks with your Cloak, of course. It can also be empowered by activating a little pillar next to the Inn in Dawnstar. When enhanced this way, the shout will also give you 10 points of stamina and 20 of magicka each time you are hit, which of course stacks with the Shield of Sanctuary or Daybreak, which you may have always active, and it means, you know, a frequent regeneration of attributes without any enchanted items on. Meanwhile, Storm Blast simply enhances your next weapon hit with a ton of shock damage. It has such a short cooldown, it would be a shame not to use it in most fights, even early on in the playthrough. And occasionally, when some enemy was particularly annoying and beefy, I also used Geomantism, which lifts the target up and sort of waggles them in the air for a while you spit some magic balls at them, and when the balls hit them, they deal a lot of damage on impact, and it's a weird one, but it is a very powerful one as well against some strong, beefy, full health enemies. Now that you endured this overexcited rant, allow me to summarize. We get a perfect Dragonslayer, a perfect Duelist, and a decent Nightblade with a touch of mystique and the divine devotion, a great character to slowly and patiently replay the main quest while taking all the Words of Power locations from Argnair and role-playing an honorary greybeard living with those weirdos at the top of the world. The grind is quite real with this one. Early game experience will be drastically different from the late game, more so than for most characters. Sneak, debuff spells and careful preparation should let you survive against all odds until all those hours spent at meditating and shouting at the sky can start paying off. And with that, we are done and dusted here. Let me know what you think. Like, share, subscribe, visit my Subscribestar profile, because you cannot unfortunately make content without food. Also support your favorite content creators altogether. We will see each other again. Bye bye.